All right. Hi, everyone. Hello. Hello. Thank you for being here and joining us for our lunch talk. I hope everyone was able to get food. So we're going to start now. My name is Ella. I am one of the campus advocacy co-chairs of the Animal Law Society. And I'm just really excited to be here right now to just talk with Chris, who's an incredible advocate for animal rights and BIPOC people in the movement. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our guest. So Chris is a social justice advocate. He's a public speaker and a nonprofit director raised in Atlanta, Georgia, that has dedicated himself to doing advocacy work that advocates for collective liberation. After learning the horrors of animal exploitation, Christopher became vegan, and he began doing community organizing and helped to co-organize Atlanta's first ever animal rights march. Christopher is the founder of Apex Advocacy, which is a nonprofit animal rights organization that teaches grassroots activism and creates various campaigns to empower Black, Indigenous people of color to advocate for animal rights. I also want to say Chris has been featured by Vox, Mercy for Animals. So he's a really incredible person, and we were very lucky to have him. So without further ado, please give it up for Chris, and we'll get started with his lecture.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you all so much. I'm grateful to be here. Even though it's raining and it's a little cold, I'm totally fine with that. It's not the type of weather that's in Atlanta. But yeah, I'm happy to be here today. So Ella kind of spoke a little bit about my background, but just before we get started, yeah, I was born in Cincinnati, Ohio, raised in Atlanta, Georgia. I've been vegan for about 7 years, been doing animal rights activism for about 6 years. And in that time, I've done hundreds of different activities, from protests to marches, disruptions, animal vigils, and I've worked with a variety of organizations, big and small, whether they be Anonymous for the Voiceless, Mercy for Animals, the Humane League, PETA. So I've done a variety of different things and brought the Animal Rights March to Atlanta in 2019 for the first time, and we did the same thing in 2022. So I started to want to advocate with more people of color because I didn't see a large space of that happening in the animal rights movement. So I started my own nonprofit, Apex Advocacy, and I've been doing that for the last 3 years and working to get more people of color involved in animal activism. So, let's see if it's working. All right, so I know that everyone here may not be vegan, and I don't want anyone to feel judged or persecuted. I will say that I view animals and animal rights much different from the vast majority of our society, which is why I'm vegan. So I don't hold back on that, but I won't hold my words, but I definitely am not trying to make anyone feel offended or less than with my views towards animals and animal rights. So this is a safe space and there's no judgment in this presentation. So what I wanted to do was start with the actual definition of veganism. So veganism is not just a diet, although it impacts your diet and everything that you do. It's not relegated to just your diet. So the actual definition of veganism was created in 1944 by the Vegan Society and Donald Watson. And the definition is a philosophy and way of living which seeks to exclude, as far as is possible and practical, all forms of exploitation and cruelty to animals for food, clothing, or any other purpose. And the reason I wanted to highlight as far as is possible and practical is because that varies from person to person. So veganism isn't about perfection. It's about making sure that anytime you have the option to, and anytime you have a realistic opportunity to, you should not contribute to the exploitation and the commodification of an individual animal. And if we decide to do that and we still have a viable, realistic opportunity and option, what we're doing is actually participating in a form of discrimination towards animals called speciesism. So speciesism, well, we know that there are various types of discriminations in our society, from racism, classism, sexism, and they all impact a vast majority of people on Earth in a variety of ways. But speciesism impacts 2 to 3 trillion individuals every year, because that's how many animals are killed every year for human consumption. And the definition of speciesism is the assumption of human superiority leading to the exploitation of non-human animals. So you can look at speciesism as the actual injustice, and being vegan is the way that you fight or oppose that injustice. So speciesism is the actual problem, and the way that I said that you combat that is by being vegan. So opposing speciesism isn't just about making sure that you buy cage-free eggs or buy products that are humanely raised. It is about acknowledging that animals have birthrights, and they shouldn't be born into systems that exploit their bodies, that commodify them, and predetermine their existence for property's sake, for the right to consume them. So it's just about acknowledging that animals should have some type of ownership and ownership and autonomy over their existence. And we don't have to think that animals are equal to humans for us to think that they have certain birthrights, because we see some animals in our society are given more rights and moral consideration than others. So essentially, for the most part, dogs and cats are the species or the types of animals in our society that have the most rights. And then other animals that are farmed, pigs, cows, and chickens, they don't have as many rights in our society. Most of them are forced to be born and put in systems that are going to exploit their body and commodify them. So I just wanted to show that, like I said, we don't have to think that animals are equal to us for us to give them certain moral consideration, because humans aren't the only individuals that deserve moral consideration. And I want to talk about the impact oppressing humans has on our environment. So according to the Environmental Protection Agency, 37% of all greenhouse gases come from animal agriculture. And according to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, 14.5% of greenhouse gases come from animal agriculture. So we see that some of the largest entities studying agriculture and the environment state that animal agriculture contributes a large amount to greenhouse gases. And this is something that I learned a bit about watching a film called Cowspiracy. And in Cowspiracy, it spoke about how animal agriculture is a leading contributor to deforestation, air pollution, water pollution, and biodiversity loss. But I also started to do my own research and started to see that it was supported by other things. So this is information from Our World in Data. And it says 80% of global agriculture land is taken by animal agriculture. So out of 100% of the land that we use for food production, 80% of that is used to raise animals for food. But only 20% of the world's supply of calories are provided by animal agriculture. So we see that we aren't maximizing the amount of resources that we have for food production if we're only getting 20% out of the 80% of the land that we're using. And according to Cornell University, emissions for agriculture are projected to increase by 80% by the year 2050. So as much as we use electronic cars to reduce global emissions, reusable shopping bags and eco-friendly straws, if we're still buying these products that come from animal agriculture, we're still contributing largely to a lot of the greenhouse gas emissions that are in our environment. So even the United Nations has stated that a plant-based diet is probably the single biggest way that an individual person can contribute to fighting against global emissions. And this is a quote from Joseph Poore. He was a lead researcher for the United Nations for this report. And he stated that a vegan diet is probably the single biggest way to reduce your impact on planet Earth, not just greenhouse gases, but global acidification, eutrophication, land use, and water use. And when you think about it, it makes sense, because if you're having to raise billions of animals for food production, think about all the water and the land and the food and the crops that you have to use to feed those animals. Where if you were to just, raise plants, you wouldn't need as much resources. It's just a measurement of resources. So that's why you have people like Joseph Poore and the United Nations making these types of statements. And I also want to talk about how safe it is to eat a plant-based diet. I know there's tons of myths about, if you're a man and you eat tofu with soy, you're going to get boobs or breasts. What else? If you don't eat a plant-based diet, if you eat a plant-based diet, you can't get the protein that you need. You can only get calcium from milk. And when you do the research, you see that these things just aren't true. Now, I will say you can eat a totally healthy plant-based diet, or you can eat an unhealthy plant-based diet. It's kind of up to you based on how you want to execute your diet. I tend to fall somewhere in the middle. Sometimes I eat healthy, sometimes I don't. So it's just kind of up to you to shape that. And all the largest dietetic associations in the world have stated that it's totally healthy to eat a plant-based diet. This is from the American Dietetic Association, and they state that vegan diets are appropriate for individuals during all stages of the life cycle, including pregnancy, lactation, infancy, childhood, and adolescence, and for athletes. So if you're an athlete, you can get the nutrients that you need on a plant-based diet if you're a bodybuilder. If you're pregnant, you can get the nutrients that you need. If you're elderly, you can get the nutrients that you need. Now, I don't know if there's any pregnant elderly bodybuilders in the world. I mean, that's not something I would recommend to people, but I guess according to the science, you can still get the nutrients that you need from plants. And also, according to the American Dietetic Association, plant-based foods have been proven to be able to reverse, prevent, or arrest certain health conditions, whether it's heart disease or high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes. These have been proven to be able to be prevented with the plant-based diet. And just speaking about the protein myth that I mentioned earlier, by show of hands, does anyone know actually how many grams of protein the average person needs? Just raise your hands if you know. I think you know. Yes.
Between 60 and 80 a day?
Yeah.
80?
You're going to say the same thing?
Yeah.
So roughly, it's estimated, according to the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, 46 grams of protein for women, 56 grams of protein for men. Now, it varies based on your daily activity. So if you're an athlete, you know you need more nutrients in your body because you're doing more physical activity, you're burning more calories. But these estimates are for that everyday person that, isn't a bodybuilder or a super athlete, and these are just some plant-based foods that are more than 56 grams of protein per day. And these are just cherry-picked foods. So it's not like I did a bunch of research to find proteins in specific foods. But as long as you're eating a balanced diet on a consistent basis, protein deficiency isn't something that is really prevalent in our society, unless I would say the biggest way that most people are protein deficient is if they are, if they are malnourished and they aren't eating, then you're probably protein deficient. But for the most part, other than that, protein deficiency isn't a real issue, especially here in the West where, we don't really get a lack of, we have higher obesity rates and, that's not that much of an issue here in the West. And these are just some foods that are plant-based meat alternatives, if you will, that have been around for ages. I mean, I think we all know plants have been around for a while and humans have been eating plants forever. But just specifically with some of these foods that are plant-based meat alternatives, if you will, tofu has been around for thousands of years and has roots in China back to about 2,000 years ago. Seitan, the same thing. About the 6th century China is when seitan is believed to have been discovered and created. And tempeh, although tempeh is, I guess, newer to Western culture, it has roots in Java, which is currently a part of Indonesia, and in about 1700. So not only are plant-based foods a way to, possibly prevent, reverse, or arrest some of the health conditions that I spoke about earlier, also people are starting to use a plant-based diet as a way to reconnect with their culture, because during the times when people of color were colonized and Africans were enslaved and brought to America, a lot of our communities were stripped of their heritage, and a plant-based diet, a largely plant-based diet or predominantly plant-based diet, was something that was very prominent in communities of color. So a lot of people are starting to decolonize by associating or consuming a plant-based diet just as a way to reconnect with their cultural heritage. Now, I am not a doctor, so as we close out this nutrient and health part of the conversation, I'm not Dr. Eubanks, so I don't want anybody saying that Dr. Eubanks said I could eat tofu for the rest of my life and get all the nutrients that I need, because that is not what I said. So I will say, if you are curious about consuming a plant-based diet, just talk to a medical professional. Now, I will say, according to time.com, doctors only receive about 11 hours of nutrition training during their whole medical residency. So I would refer you to speak to a dietitian, someone that is specifically trained in diet and the foods that you can eat to get the nutrients that you need. So I want to talk about veganism as a philosophical belief and how it's been protected throughout courts in the world. So in 2020, there was a person that worked for this organization, I believe it was called the League Against Cruel Sports. And he had concerns about his pension money going towards industries and companies that test on animals or use animals for research or exploit animals. So he took these concerns to his employer. Somehow he ended up not continuing to be employed by that job. And he took them to court over this issue. And the courts ruled that he had every right to bring these concerns to his employer because they were protected under the Equality Act of 2010 in the UK, stating that veganism falls within that protected belief system. Also, just this year, in February of 2024, there was a girl in Denmark, a kindergartner, who wasn't allowed to have, her school didn't provide her with any plant-based options for lunch. And she wasn't allowed to bring her own lunch into school. So the courts ruled that her and her parents were actually being discriminated against because veganism was a protected philosophical belief. And this was protected by Article 9 of the European Convention on Human Rights. So we see around the world, there are governments and systems that are starting to acknowledge that veganism isn't just a diet, it's a bigger philosophical belief system. Now, I may have stated earlier that we kill 2 to 3 trillion animals every year for our consumption. Because think about it, anytime you go to a grocery store or to a clothing shop, there's no shortage of leather coats or leather wallets and accessories. You can always find bacon and ham in the grocery store. So it takes about 2 to 3 trillion animals to be killed every year for us to make animal products easily accessible to us. So we obviously not only exploit animals' bodies, but we also exploit animals with how we speak about them. And this is called speciesist language. So speciesist language is defined as the use of the English language to commodify and objectify animals. So some examples of this are when people say things like, it's easier to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. They were running around like a chicken with their head cut off. You know, this is a very violent way that we speak about animals. Also, when we refer to animals as it, that is a way that we objectify animals. We don't even acknowledge sometimes that they have a gender. You know, people will say, look at that cat, it's so cute. Or look at that dog, it's so cute. But we don't say, look at that dog, he or she or they are adorable. Also, we use euphemisms when we talk about the products that we consume from animals. So we say things like bacon, sausage, salami, pepperoni, we say leather, but we don't really say we're eating the flesh of a baby pig. We say we're eating bacon. We don't say that we're wearing the skin of a cow. We say we're wearing leather. And this makes it easier to contribute to these products. Also, when someone say they are treated like an animal, that's typically an insult, right? Like if that's considered to be treated inhumane, to be treated like an animal. And also, even when we refer to animals, we should probably use the term non-human animals, because what humans have done, we've essentially separated ourselves or tried to separate ourselves from the animal kingdom when we are just one species of animal. So we should probably refer to the other animals in the animal kingdom as non-human animals if we're trying to separate that we're talking about animals that aren't human. So just as you went down this list, just if anyone wants to share any possible species language that they are familiar with, while I was going over these, did anybody think of any while I was kind of going through this list of species language? Just feel free to raise your hands if any species language pops up in your mind. Yes. Absolutely, yeah, for sure. Any other ideas about species language? Yes. Absolutely, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Pig in general is just an insult, whether it's police or, a man's behavior. So, like, but pigs are really cool. So,
They are, absolutely.
and they're relatively smart compared to other mammals. So it's actually a compliment if you were to compare pigs. If they were any animal, like that's good.
Yeah, I was actually going to mention that too. Yes.
It's along those lines of bird brain, or something our former president likes to say a lot is like a dog. Like he was fired like a dog, which doesn't even make any sense.
So true. Any other ones? But those are great examples.
I mean, we could go the racist language, coon,
Mm-hmm.
black people, back in even today. But
Mhm.
kind of language.
Oh, so we're getting deep in the layers now. We're not only talking about species language, but like
Yeah.
racism and how these systems of hierarchy like prioritize certain individuals and like where you fall in that totem pole. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
even the raccoon, sort of
Mhm.
vermin.
Yeah.
And calling someone a rat if they snitch.
A rat.
Yeah.
I was going to say that one too. Also, a snake, or they're like a snake. That's not a positive connotation.
That language is used a lot here.
Yeah. It's just species language. Yes, I'll take one more.
Pretty much all of the animals, like I was thinking, like a chicken is someone that is coward. A rat, well, it depends on the country. Look at it, always has negativity.
Mm-hmm.
The pig is someone that is supposed to be like dirty, which
Yeah.
but in reality pigs are really clean.
Yeah.
It's just that they need like water and because they cannot sweat like we do, so they
Mhm.
when they don't have that possibility, they just use the mud that is around, and they are really clean actually.
Yeah, they really are. And they actually separate, like if you are around pigs, they kind of, I don't know, do their dirty work wherever they aren't living, if you will. So, if this was their living area, they would do all their dirty work in the corner and, just keep it there and then live in the rest of the area. So, yeah, absolutely. I'll take one last one.
I was thinking of sort of the layers of things of cow, like it typically a pejorative for women who are heavier. And so you've got those layers again.
Mm-hmm. Oh, we are getting deep today. Like, okay, that's well. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, just continue to think about how we use species language, and even as I'm a vegan, I catch myself sometimes can of worms, or it's just so many terms that you may not have thought about before that are species and how we speak about animals. So I want to talk about the plant-based food sales and how people think that their choices are having a certain impact, but they may not actually be having the impact that they think. So the plant-based food sales worldwide for 2021 were 25.6 billion, and in 2022 it was 27.8 billion, according to the Good Food Institute. So we're seeing that plant-based foods are getting more and more sales. Now the amount of animals killed worldwide, well, these are land animals. Like I said, 2 to 3 trillion is the total amount for land and sea animals, but just specifically land animals, since we can actually quantify those a lot more easily. The animals killed in the ocean, the numbers are so big, we can only guesstimate. We don't actually have hard data to support the exact number. But for land animals, in 2021, 81.7 billion land animals were killed worldwide for food production. And in 2022, 83.3 billion animals were killed for food production. So we see that, okay, more and more people are buying plant-based food options, but the amount of animals are being killed are also on the rise. So you would think that the more vegan options we have available, the less animals will be killed. But that's actually not true. It's not a direct correlation. And a large part of this reason is because animal agriculture receives a lot of funding from the government. So according to Sentient Media, animal agriculture receives about $50.17 billion of federal funding, and plants for human consumption receive about 24.69 billion. So one of the reasons that plant-based options can be on the rise in our society, but not have a direct correlation to the amount of animals being killed is because these companies in this industry and animal agriculture get so much funding, it doesn't directly impact their bottom line if people are buying more vegan options. So, we think about people in our society that get federal assistance, whether it's Medicaid or Medicare or, food stamps, Section 8 housing, and they're often vilified and looked at as, they're lazy, they can't do for themselves. But when we have one of the biggest industries in the world receiving large amounts of federal funding, it's just status quo. It's just par for the course. Nobody questions it, think about it. It's just, something that is needed in our society. But I just kind of wanted to show that dichotomy. So, that's why no matter how many vegan burgers you buy, it doesn't necessarily equate to saving more animals' lives, or no matter how many vegan leather wallets you buy or coats you buy, there's not a direct correlation. Now, I still support these things, and I am vegan and will always be vegan for ethical reasons. But I do know that the way I'm spending my money it may not have the impact that I want. But I also know that I'm still going to put my money and my belief systems in the world that I want to see, not just because I won't not do that because it doesn't have the impact that I would like it to have. But every vegan product may not be ethically sourced. Every vegan company may not be ethical. But I will say, just like I have on the screen, there will never be an ethical way to support speciesism. I don't think there's an ethical way to support racism, classism, or sexism. And speciesism is a discrimination towards a group of individuals. And as we are thinking about we're going to need all of us in our fights for collective liberation. I mean, we live in a world where various forms of discrimination coexist alongside each other. I mean, when we see one form of discrimination playing out, it empowers other forms of discrimination to play out. So that's why we have to work towards solutions that include all of our rights. And this is what collective liberation essentially is. And the Center of Racial Justice notates collective liberation as the following. Collective liberation acknowledges that multiple oppressions exist and that we work in solidarity to undo oppression in ourselves, our families, our communities, and our institutions in order to achieve a world that is truly free. So whether you're a vegan or whether you're not a vegan, whether you're an animal rights activist or a human rights activist, we all live in a world where various forms of oppression play off of each other and coexist with each other. So you won't go and find places that don't have racism. I mean, wherever you find racism, you're going to find sexism. Wherever you find classism, you're going to find speciesism. So that's why we need to work towards a future for a collective liberation mindset and approach. And I want to speak about the way that consuming animals and the animal agriculture industry negatively impacts people of color in our communities. And I want to talk about the rates of lactose intolerance around the world and how that correlates, because about 70% of the world's population is lactose intolerant. And a large part of that are people of color. And cows produce milk because they are mothers, not because they are cows. So cows don't just naturally produce milk. These industries force them to be pregnant because they have a pregnancy cycle that is similar to a woman, and it's about 9 months. So they force the cow to be pregnant, and once the cow has given birth, they separate the baby cows from the mother cow because they need to take that milk and produce it for human consumption. And if the baby was there consuming it, then there wouldn't be milk available for humans to consume. So it makes sense that most of the world is lactose intolerant because literally just think about a woman's breast milk. It's not meant for a human cow. And the milk from a cow's udder isn't meant for an adult human. So it makes sense biologically that our bodies can't process dairy because it's literally and biologically not meant for adult humans. It's not meant for our species. So these are just information about lactose intolerance rates, and these are the sources here. And it says 85% of adult African Americans in the United States are lactose intolerant. More than 70% of East Asian descent, people of East Asian descent are lactose intolerant, and the rate of lactose intolerance is also very high in individuals of Hispanic descent, Native American, and Jewish individuals. And this is why you have someone like Dr. Milton Mills that has just flat out said dairy is racist. He's a prominent doctor in the Baltimore, Maryland area. And he was a lead plaintiff in a class action lawsuit demanding that there be warning labels placed on milk, because we have the promotion of these foods that disproportionately impact people of color. So this is why he made the stance that dairy is racist. And as we talk about this industry and how it negatively impacts people of color, when you think about slaughterhouses and factory farms and where they are placed, they aren't near country clubs. They aren't near golf clubs. They are in typically low income, Black and brown, and rural communities. And think about, so when all of these billions of cows and pigs produce all of this feces and waste, they don't have a toilet. It doesn't go into a septic system. What happens is there's a large plot of land right beside the slaughterhouses, and all of this feces and waste goes right literally next door, and it is building up, it is forming bacteria. And think about all the flatulence and gas that comes from cows and pigs if you are forcefully breeding them by the billions. All of this goes into the air. So this contributes heavily to environmental racism. And not only does it contribute to environmental racism, think about the people that are in these jobs. So Tyson meat packing plants reported on average 1 amputation per month in the first 9 months of 2015. So think about who's doing these jobs, who are getting amputated by this machinery. I mean, these instruments that are used in slaughterhouses are instruments of death. They are literally there to kill individuals on an everyday basis. So we shouldn't be surprised that, you know, this industry has the highest rates of injury in practically any industry. Also, speaking about slaughterhouses, so there's a person called the knocker that works in the slaughterhouse. So this is the employee tasked with firing the bolt gun that kills or incapacitates each cow, and they see around 2,500 animals per day, approximately 1 cow every 12 seconds. So raise your hands if you've ever seen a cow in real life. So the vast majority of us. You know, cows grow to be big individuals. They grow to be 1,000 or 2,000 pounds. So just imagine putting a bolt gun nail through the head of a dog every 12 seconds. Now scale that individual up to be 5 or 10 times larger. That's what it is like doing this job. So with this next statement, it says slaughterhouse employment increases total arrest rates and arrests for violent crimes in comparison with other industries. I can only imagine the psychological toll that is on an individual having to kill every 12 seconds some individual that is, you know, 1,000 pounds. That weighs on your mind heavy. So I'm not surprised by this last statement. So once I learned about speciesism, I decided that I had to speak out and be an advocate for animal rights, because my entire life I was fighting against racism and or at least outspoken and opposed racism and classism and sexism. But I didn't realize I was contributing to speciesism 3, 4, 5, 6 times a day with the things that I purchased, with the food that I ate, with the coats that I wear and the clothing that I wear. So once I said that, okay, I'm someone that is actively trying to work against systems of oppression, and here I am perpetuating a system of oppression that I had no idea was even a thing. And once I kind of made that connection, I said I have to advocate for animal rights, because, you know, literally 2 to 3 trillion individuals are being killed, you know, for my consumption. And it's something that I didn't agree with, so I started advocating for animals. And as I mentioned earlier, I helped to organize Atlanta's first ever animal rights march in 2019. And I started to want to advocate with more people of color. And that's why I created my nonprofit Apex Advocacy, where that's essentially what we do. And some of the campaigns that we're working on this year, we're really excited about, is our activism starter guide, specifically for people of color. It's censored for people in the US, but in the starter guide, we go over legal and safety measures for people of color doing activism in predominantly white spaces and animal activism. And I personally have been a part of some activism, and I don't think many people of color should have been in those spaces when I was doing that advocacy. There just wasn't a level of awareness around how people should conduct themselves when doing activities. So we speak about that. I speak about the history of plant-based eating and animal activism in communities of color, fundraising for your efforts as a person of color in animal rights, and also wellness and self-care for sustainable activism. We need people that are going to be advocates for a long period of time, whether it's, once a week, once a month, once a year, it has to be sustainable for you. We also have a campaign called Pre-Animal Activist Week. The acronym is PAAW, so we call it PAW. And we take people of color from other social justice movements that are interested in veganism or learning about animal rights, and we bring them to Atlanta to do essentially a week of like vegan education and animal activism. So we have it's entirely plant-based experience. We have plant-based cooking demos for them so they can learn how to make plant-based meals. We do documentary screenings, we do live workshops with them, and we do animal rights activism, and we definitely have a intersectional approach to our animal activism. And also we have a free online Slack community for our Apex community. So we have about 300 people of color in our Slack channel. And these are all people of color that are either involved in animal activism or work in animal advocacy or just care about animal activism or just animals in general or in caring for them. And we share various resources in our Slack channel. So we have resources for fundraising and career opportunities. And we also have our monthly animal activism trainings that we do. And actually the next one will be this Saturday on March 30th at 1 p.m. Eastern. And it's called Unity in Action, Embracing Community Care for Collective Liberation. So we're going to speak about certain healthcare and just being mindful of ableist practices, even in animal advocacy and any social justice space that you're in. So this first training is specifically for our community, but once the event is over, we do make it available to the public. So essentially, the people in our community get instant access to it, and then we make it available. So if you're interested in this, that's the link at the bottom, but I'll also have a QR code at the end where you can learn more about our work and things in our other events also. And just kind of as we close out, I want to close out on the words of Angela Davis, who we all know is an icon, educator, advocate, just overall powerful and incredible individual. And many people don't know that she's also vegan. And this is a statement that she made. She says, "I usually don't mention that I'm vegan because it is, I think, a part of a revolutionary perspective. How can we not only discover more compassionate relations with human beings, but how can we develop compassionate relations with the other creatures with who we share this planet? And that would mean challenging the whole capitalist industrial form of food production." So I just want to say thank you for allowing me to speak here today. This is the QR code with links to our activism starter guide, more information about our organization to make a donation. And also there's a feedback form about my presentation. So if there's any ways I can make this better or improve it or make it more impactful, I'm glad to hear from you all. So thank you all so much. And I guess we'll take questions now, right? Thank you.
All right.
Okay. So I need to keep this on? Okay.
All right. That was wonderful. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
So, do we have any questions in the room? Yeah, please.
Oh, that, still not? Hello? Okay, cool. I have a couple questions. So first, I really admire the work that you do, and thank you so much for being here. I'm wondering if you faced any tension with, you said you hosted the first march, I think you said in Atlanta in 2019. I'm wondering if you faced any tension with like Black Lives Matter, if you found that it's been a fairly symbiotic relationship. And then second, I've been kind of surprised by how little people are talking about the pig organ transplants and the genetic modification that's happened in the last 2 weeks. around genetically modifying pig embryos and implanting them into adult pigs. I've raised this like as a concern just among colleagues at law school, and it feels to me like nobody really cares. They're just like, it's great that we're getting organ transplants. So I'm curious if you have any comments or perspective on that.
Yeah, so, okay, just louder than I thought. So as far as the first question, I haven't really received too much negative feedback when I encounter other social justice advocates. Obviously, sometimes, for sure. But in general, people are receptive. I think it's mainly the approach that you use that determines the amount of pushback that you'll get, if you will. So when we organized the first ever Animal Rights March in Atlanta in 2019, when we opened it up to the community, we did it in a very, I guess, legal is the only way to say it, but we had our permits and, we had the police there. So it was a family environment and it was welcoming of everyone. So I haven't received much, but I do at times get people coming and saying, hey, how can you advocate for animals when people are suffering? And, it's not a zero-sum game. You can do more than one thing at a time. You can advocate for many individuals, and it doesn't mean that you care less because you are, going to a women's rights march and, not at a Black Lives Matter march, or you're going to a Black Lives Matter march and you're not in an animal rights march. You can have, you can be a multifaceted person and care about a variety of things. As far as the second question, I haven't heard much about that, so I can't really speak into depths about that, but I think ultimately, I don't see animals as things that are to be consumed. I would hope that we will allow them to live in a society where they aren't objectified and used in any capacity for the most part. Like I said, as far as it's practical and possible. So, on the surface level, I just don't support the objectification of animals, and I think that kind of falls in line with that second question.
I think it might be partly, and especially apparent to me because the first transplant occurred in Boston, I think, last week. But thank you. for your response.
Sure.
Any other questions? Yeah, Carlos.
Well, thank you, Chris. It's amazing what you're doing. Is it Apex or Apex?
Apex.
Apex. So, I don't know, maybe this is a difficult question to ask, but what do you think is the main reason why people of color will feel more comfortable being part of Apex that is led by people of color than being part of another NGO or group which might be led by white people? I don't know.
Oh, that is a great question. One that I get often. It's so many layers to that. One, these organizations that aren't built with inclusivity in mind don't have those practices, don't have a wide variety of thought, a wide variety of people. So it's typically, what's the word I'm looking for? When all the thoughts and the actions are like one way. Yeah, how much exactly?
But
yeah.
in terms of thinking.
Even in thinking, even in things like the pamphlets that are used. Like one thing that was interesting about our activism starter guide, I think everyone in there was a person of color. And I was just trying to think of any type of brochure regarding animal rights or veganism where the majority of the people weren't white. And maybe there's a couple of organizations, but by far and large, most of the literature that you're going to see for animal rights or veganism is predominantly white people in them. So I think not only does the infrastructures themselves, like the organizations, they don't have adequate representation on their boards, and that kind of trickles down into all of the other practices also. So I think it makes it a bit uncomfortable for, individuals that aren't that to be involved. And also I spoke about some of the practices that take place at actions that I've been a part of. And I just know that sometimes the way that they interact with the police is extremely problematic. And I could not in good faith recommend any person of color to be a part of those specific actions. So it's just a bunch of things like that. And also that oftentimes people that advocate for animal rights come across as single issue focused. They don't seem to have, and this isn't unilateral, this isn't for everyone, but I'm just talking about the perception of animal rights activists. They seem to only be aware of the injustices that are happening to animals and not really aware of the issues that are happening to humans, but humans are the ones that are advocating for animals, so you can't like separate those two. So I think those are just some of the reasons why I haven't experienced a large amount of people of color advocating for animal rights.
So before we get to the next question, I do have a question for you. If you could, so you talk about how you were vegetarian first and then you were vegan. Could you talk about your process or just walk us through your journey of perhaps even starting in childhood, some of your influences that led you to even start thinking this way? Yeah, if you will.
Yeah, I know this is something we spoke about. So when I was 13, I read the autobiography of Malcolm X. And this was the first time I had actually thought about the idea of not consuming animals. So he was a devout Muslim, he didn't eat pigs. And I believe he was either pescatarian or vegetarian by the time he was assassinated. But just reading the autobiography of Malcolm X introduced me to the concept of like, oh, wait, I don't have to consume animals. Like, I didn't really think that was much of an option. It was just something that society, pushed upon me. So I became vegetarian a few years after reading the autobiography of Malcolm X, and I was vegetarian for about a decade. Although it wasn't for ethical reasons, it was just more or less for diet. I would say, like I said, about 7 years ago, I started to learn more about veganism and animal rights, and I decided to go vegan then. But I think I was just introduced to the concept of not having to consume animals, through the story of a Black man, which is, one of the most prominent Black men in history. So I think that kind of helped nudge me or make me feel a bit more comfortable with this idea. So by the time I thought about not being vegan, I was like, oh, it doesn't feel weird. Although I will say, during the time when I was strictly vegetarian, this was what, 20, maybe the mid 2000s to the late 2000s, there wasn't a lot of vegan options, and there wasn't the community that it is now. Excuse me.
Had to deal with like the Morning Star, and that was pretty
Exactly.
much.
Yeah. So now it's a larger plethora of these options available. So that makes it feel more comfortable too. But that was just essentially my journey from reading the autobiography of Malcolm X to now having my own nonprofit in a nutshell.
Thank you. I know we have another question.
Thanks so much for your work. Just had a question on the graph you had that showed meat consumption was actually going up, I guess, from last year, while plant-based options were also going up. I was wondering if you had any visibility into dairy, because my understanding is the dairy industry has really been hit a bit and is in decline, I think in part because of the rise in nut-based milks, and I'm wondering if what the difference is there, why we're seeing an impact in dairy and not in meat.
Yeah, that is a good question. And the one thing I forgot to mention is that on that QR code, it has the links to all of the resources that I cited. So if you're just interested in learning more about that specific information, you can go there. But that is a good question. I would actually like to know that myself, because like I said, lactose intolerance rates are higher for our general population. So I think that's one part of it. But in terms of dairy consumption and the money that they bring in versus, I guess, beef or chicken, I don't know that for sure. But I would assume that a large part of the subsidy still kind of help them stay afloat too. So even if they aren't producing as many sales, they're probably still able to at least stay afloat somewhat because of the large subsidy. So I think that's the best I can kind of answer I can give you for that question.
Anyone else? Yeah, please.
Thanks, Chris. That was awesome to hear your journey. I just kind of had a question about the aspect of liberation and how the exploitation of just one group is tied in with the exploitation of others that you mentioned. And I'm thinking, in this context, I'm thinking about the women's rights movement, but also let's say slavery, in America, and how that there was even though there were allies, on both blacks at that slavers at that time had allies from the white community. The slaves are able to help in their own liberation. They're able to, at some point, actually fight on the side that is going to free them. So, and same with women. Even if when women are able to gain more rights and vote, they are actually able to also contribute to the economy, and they do something. They're not necessarily commodified the same way animals are, but we are all in a way contribute into the GDP, of the country. If you have animals that you want to liberate, with all these other groups, there's usually a war or some kind of some event that brings it to a head. And when you win freedom, the impoverished group can help everyone. What about animals? Like, don't you see it being more of an uphill battle to decommodify them if after they've been freed, we can't use them anymore for anything?
Yes, and this is something I actually think about often because I was at this conference earlier last year, and we were thinking about like what would be the tipping point for the animal rights movement. I think on a smaller scale, some times when animal rights issue have made, I guess the mainstream media was with Harambe when they were killed, when he was killed in, I think it was Cincinnati, I believe, or I could have the location wrong, but it's going to be an uphill battle because I literally don't know what that tipping point could be. I think the only thing, and I don't know how this would happen, is for us to be able to communicate with animals. That would probably change our perception of how we interact with them. But I think, we're, millions of years from now, I have no idea if we will ever be able to do that. But it's a really uphill battle because I can't think of a tipping point. I really don't know. I think tipping points are probably going to be, are going to happen organically. And, when it happens, it'll be impactful. But the fact that animals can't speak on their behalf, excuse me, does make it a bit of a challenge for them because they can't fight back against these systems. The most, when I was at the conference, one activist was saying the most that we can do for animals is offer them the option to not be born into the system of oppression. And it's just kind of sad when you think about it. It's the best thing that we can do for them is to allow them to not exist in terms of animal rights. So yeah, I think about that constantly, actually. I really don't know what it would take right now for society to kind of turn on that switch and view animals as individuals that are worthy of their own existence. But whatever it is, I think we're unfortunately a long way from it.
We have time for one more question. Yeah,
no,
please.
I was curious about, oh, sorry. Yeah, no, you mentioned that communication with animals could be a great leap forward in our treatment of them. But I was just wondering, relating to the broader discussion of speciesism, given that the species, we're closest to communicating with, or who have languages we can most readily understand as human beings, tend to be, certain charismatic megafauna like chimpanzees, gorillas, dolphins, elephants, magpies. Don't you think that might reinforce speciesism instead? I was just wondering if you had thoughts on that. Yeah, if communication is sort of the way forward.
That is a great question, and I don't know, to be honest. It could possibly backfire. You never know. It's so hard to say. I think we're so far from getting to that point. It's even hard to conceive what it would be. So, I'm just kind of, throwing something against the wall, and I have no idea.
All right, well, can everyone please give Chris another round of applause? Thank him for being here.
Thank you. Thank you all so much.
I just want to thank you all for being here, and thank you, Chris, for making it here on this rainy day from Atlanta. Thank you, and Ella, you did such a great job. This was Ella's idea to have you here, so thank you for setting up
Hey,
this
Ella.
panel. And thank you to Kelly Reddy, our program administrator, and Sarah Pickering, our communications director, for making this all happen. So thank you so much. And the slides will be on the on our website, so make sure to check out that and the QR code that has all the sources. Thank you.
Thank you, and if there's more food in the back, please feel free.
Nice, we did it. Great. So cool.